especially with something like the Passion that I did, the written word was very important because it was, you got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. My contention is, when I was making it, it was like, you're making this film, and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind.
Mel Gibson leans across the table, looks Joe Rogan dead in the eye, and tells him there is a hidden message buried in the very first frame of the Passion of the Christ that almost no one has ever found. Not a metaphor, not a vague artistic choice. A deliberate encoded piece of theology so ancient it predates Christianity itself, compressed into a single image that flashes on screen for seconds and contains the entire story of humanity from the fall to the final defeat of evil. Rogan goes quiet. Then Gibson starts breaking down what else he hid in this film. Layer after layer, scene after scene, symbols and codes woven so deep into the footage that even biblical scholars miss them for 20 years. And Rogan's expression shifts into something you almost never see from him. Because this was not just a movie about the crucifixion, it was a cipher. And Gibson was about to decode the whole thing. The codes no one was supposed to see. The opening scene, the Garden of Gethsemane. Darkness everywhere. Jesus is kneeling in prayer while his closest companions sleep around him. Unable to stay awake for even 1 hour during his moment of greatest anguish, Satan drifts through the shadows like smoke. A serpent slithers from the darkness and Jesus crushes it beneath his heel. Here is the catch. That single image is not atmosphere. It is not mood lighting. It is a direct callback to Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelium, the very first promise of redemption given to humanity after the fall in the Garden of Eden. God tells the serpent that the offspring of the woman will crush his head, and simultaneously it foreshadows the book of Revelation, the final total defeat of evil at the end of time. 2 bookends of the entire Bible, the first prophecy and the last fulfillment. Gibson compressed thousands of years of theology into one visual moment. 1 foot, 1 serpent, the entire scriptural narrative from fall to redemption in a single frame, and that was just the first scene. Because Gibson did this again and again throughout the entire film, and almost nobody noticed. During the scourging scene, Roman soldiers tear into Christ's flesh with methodical cruelty. Gibson cuts to a single drop of blood striking the stone floor. Most viewers see brutality. That is all they see. But what Gibson actually filmed was a visual echo of the Passover lamb, the blood sacrifice described in Exodus that protected the Israelites from the angel of death in Egypt. The entire scourging sequence is not just torture. It is ritual fulfillment. Those soldiers are unknowingly completing a pattern set in motion centuries before they were born. Every lash is prophecy being enacted in real time. The whips, the blood on the stone, the lamb being slaughtered. Gibson layered all of it so precisely that theologians who later studied the film frame by frame were stunned at the density of reference packed into a sequence most audiences experienced as pure violence. Gibson told Rogan he wanted audiences to feel the violence physically, to recoil from it, because centuries of sanitized religious art had numbed people to what crucifixion actually was. But he also wanted the theologically literate viewer to recognize what the violence meant. 2 films playing simultaneously. One on the surface for the body, one buried beneath it for the mind. And get this, most people walked past the next one without even blinking. When Jesus falls carrying the cross, Mary rushes toward him through the crowd. Gibson immediately cuts to a flashback. Jesus as a small child stumbling on the ground, Mary running to scoop him up, the same hands that lifted a toddler now reaching for a man she cannot save, a mother's instinct repeating across time. That scene is not in any gospel. Gibson invented it entirely, and it devastates anyone who has ever been a parent because it translates cosmic theology into the most human emotion imaginable. A mother watching her child suffer, powerless to stop it. That is not scripture. That is parenthood. And Gibson understood that the most powerful theology is the kind that does not feel like theology at all. But the visual codes were just the surface layer, because what Gibson did with the language itself was even more calculated, and almost nobody caught it. He filmed the entire movie in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, languages dead to everyday conversation for centuries. Most people assumed this was an artistic choice for historical authenticity. Gibson told Rogan the real reason was far more strategic. He wanted to strip away the protective familiarity of English. When people hear passages they have memorized since childhood spoken in their own language, they stop listening. The words become wallpaper. By forcing audiences to read subtitles, Gibson made them see the events as if encountering them for the very first time. The subtitles were not a limitation. They were the weapon. Now, pay attention to this part because Gibson spent years pulling from ancient theological sources beyond the 4 canonical Gospels, weaving in details about the cosmic spiritual warfare happening behind every visible moment of suffering. The demonic children tormenting Judas after his betrayal, the androgynous, deeply unsettling depiction of Satan cradling a grotesque infant, a deliberate inversion of the Madonna and child, beauty turned inside out, the flashback to Jesus as a carpenter building an unusually tall table, Mary's confusion, and Jesus joking with a grin that it would catch on. None of these scenes have direct biblical basis. Gibson designed them as visual theology, using cinematic language to communicate spiritual truths that literal depiction could never reach. Every shadow is deliberate, every camera angle carries weight, and the vast majority of audiences walked right past all of it. Think about that for a second. Millions of people watched this film, wept in theaters, walked out changed, and they never even saw half of what was actually on the screen. If this is already changing how you see this film, subscribe now because what happened behind the cameras is even harder to explain, and it starts with things that should not be possible. The door that slammed shut. When Gibson brought this project to Hollywood, he did not expect what happened next. He had just directed Braveheart. He had won the Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Director. He was one of the most bankable names in the industry. And when he walked into studio meetings with the Passion of the Christ, the doors closed in his face. One meeting tells you everything. Gibson sat across from studio heads and pitched a film about the final 12 hours of Christ's life. He watched their faces shut down like switches being thrown. No discussion of budget, no creative notes, just silence. Then, a polite suggestion that perhaps this was not the right time. Here's the deal. It was never about timing. Gibson told Rogan he recognized the pattern immediately. Christianity was the one faith tradition Hollywood felt comfortable dismissing. Colleagues started keeping their distance. Phone calls went unanswered. People he considered friends suddenly had scheduling conflicts every time he called. Industry insiders leaked negative stories to the press before a single frame had been shot. The narrative was already being built. This filmmaker had lost his mind. But Gibson would not walk away. His Catholic faith was not a brand. It was the foundation of everything. And this was the story he believed he had been put on earth to tell. So he did something almost unheard of. He put $30 million of his own money on the line. No studio safety net, no committee approving decisions. He assembled a crew, flew them to Italy, and started shooting a film the entire industry told him would end his career. $30 million, personal money, in an industry where billionaires use other people's cash to hedge risk. Gibson bet everything on a subtitled film in dead languages about a story Hollywood explicitly said nobody wanted to see. That is not ambition. That is conviction at a level most people will never understand. But the money, the rejection, the professional exile, none of that is the part that keeps people up at night. Because what happened on that set in Italy crosses into territory that defies explanation. And 2 decades later, not a single person who was there has changed their story. The events no one can explain. It started with Jim Caviezel's body. The cross he carried during filming weighed over 150 pounds. Real weight, real wood. During one take, it dislocated his shoulder completely. Caviezel's face in that scene is not acting. That is a man in genuine agony captured on camera, used in the final cut. He later described the sensation as feeling his arms separate from his body while the cameras kept rolling. Then came the scourging sequence. The whips were designed to simulate impact on camera, but twice they connected with Caviezel's actual body. The first strike knocked the air from his lungs. The second left his back bleeding and raw. The crew watched in horror. Nobody called cut fast enough. And get this, Caviezel did not ask to stop. He did not call for a medic. He did not break character. He kept going, take after take. By the end of production, he had developed hypothermia from filming nearly naked and freezing Italian conditions. He contracted pneumonia. He lost significant weight. His skin was lacerated. His body was pushed to the absolute edge of endurance. The crew watched it happen over weeks and months. They saw what this role was doing to him physically, and they knew they were witnessing something that went beyond professional commitment. You are not watching a performance in that film. You are watching a man who genuinely suffered to bring this story to life. And every person on that set knew it. But here is where it crosses the line into something else entirely, because then the lightning started. Assistant director John Michelini was standing on set when the first bolt hit him. A direct strike. He survived. The crew was shaken, but tried to rationalize it. Freak weather. Bad luck. Then it happened again. A second direct lightning strike hit Michelini during the same production. The odds of being struck once in a lifetime are roughly 1 in 15,000. Twice during a single film shoot defies every statistical model in existence. Michelini later described the experience as feeling chosen, though he could not say by what. Now pay attention to this, because this is the moment that changed everything on that set. During the filming of the crucifixion scene, Caviezel was suspended on the cross. Arms extended, crew positioned around him, cameras rolling, and lightning struck him directly. The man playing Jesus Christ, hanging in the crucifixion position, hit by a bolt from the sky. He walked away completely unharmed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The crew stood frozen, staring at a man who should have been dead and was instead standing there breathing unheard. In biblical tradition, lightning represents divine power and judgment. It covered Mount Sinai when God delivered the 10 Commandments. Nobody on that set could offer a rational explanation. Several crew members said the moment permanently changed the atmosphere of the entire production. The jokes stopped. The casual conversations between takes went quiet. People stopped treating it as just another film. Something was present on that set. something none of them had signed up for, something none of them could see, and everyone could feel it. But here's the deal. The lightning was not even the part that shook Rogan. What Gibson told him next is Luca Lionello was cast as Judas Iscariot. He arrived on set as an avowed atheist. No belief in God, no interest in the supernatural. He took the role because it was a compelling part in an ambitious film. Nothing more. Months later, when filming wrapped, Lionello had become a believer. He struggled to articulate what had changed. Spending months inhabiting the psychology of betrayal, guilt, and redemption had reached something he did not know existed inside himself. He told interviewers he could not explain it rationally. Something on that set had broken through whatever wall he had built around himself. He simply knew he was not the same man who had arrived in Italy. Think about that. An atheist walked onto a film set to play a fictional role. He walked off a believer, and he never went back. And the quiet miracles kept accumulating. Maya Morgenstern, the Romanian actress who portrayed the Virgin Mary, carried a secret throughout the entire shoot. She was pregnant. She carried a child within her while performing the role of a mother watching her son die. Life growing inside a story dominated by death. Resurrection woven into the very body of the woman portraying the deepest grief imaginable. Nobody knew until later, and when they found out, the symbolism hit them like a freight train. Then there were the healings. Gibson described to Rogan a young girl with severe epilepsy who had been present during filming. She had suffered seizures her entire life. Doctors had tried everything. After her time on set, she went a full month without a single episode, not one seizure. It broke every medical expectation. Others reportedly experienced restored senses and physical improvements that doctors could not account for. Nobody could explain it. Nobody tried to. The people who were there all walked away saying the same thing. They had not just made a movie. They had stepped into something. The verdict, the world delivered. When The Passion of the Christ hit theaters in February 2004, the reaction split the world open. Roger Ebert, arguably the most influential film critic of his generation, gave it a perfect 4 stars. He said that in decades of reviewing cinema, he had never grasped the depth of Christ's suffering until Gibson's portrayal forced him to confront it. But not everyone agreed. Some critics called the violence excessive. Religious leaders raised concerns that certain portrayals could reinforce historical stereotypes used to fuel anti-Semitism. These were not trivial objections. The accusation of deicide, the claim that Jewish people bore collective responsibility for Christ's death, had been weaponized throughout European history to justify persecution. Any filmmaker approaching this material carried a responsibility far beyond entertainment. Gibson maintained his intent was to show collective human responsibility. Romans carried out the execution. Jewish leaders called for it. The disciples fled and denied knowing him. Every human being whose failings made the sacrifice necessary shares the weight. The controversy only amplified public interest, and the result obliterated every prediction. The Passion of the Christ earned over $700 million worldwide. A film no studio would touch, made by one man with his own money in dead languages with subtitles. It became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history. The numbers made Hollywood liars. Churches organized mass viewings that became spiritual events. Viewers left theaters weeping. Atheists reconsidered assumptions. Believers felt their faith renewed with a force that caught them off guard. The film did something entertainment rarely achieves. It mattered. It left a mark that did not fade when the credits rolled. What is coming next? But here is the thing nobody expected. Gibson told Rogan he is not finished. He is only getting started. For years, Gibson and screenwriter Randall Wallace have been building something that dwarfs The Passion entirely. A film about the resurrection, not a conventional sequel that picks up where the crucifixion left off. Gibson described it as a cosmic exploration spanning from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. Eternal warfare between good and evil with that singular, impossible moment. A dead man walking out of a sealed tomb at the center of everything. If The Passion was about suffering, this film is about what the suffering was for. Gibson told Rogan the resurrection is the most challenging aspect of faith for most people, and he understands why. Someone executed by Roman soldiers, confirmed dead, buried in a sealed tomb, guarded by armed men, then walking out 3 days later, alive. It defies everything we understand about the natural world. Gibson admitted that for much of his life, he accepted these claims because others believed them. Family, church, tradition. But over time, he sought his own understanding. He wrestled with doubt, and he emerged with a conviction that was his own. That personal journey now drives every creative decision behind this new film. And then Gibson made one argument to Rogan that landed like a hammer. Every apostle, with the possible exception of John, died a violent death rather than deny what they witnessed. Crucified, beheaded, flayed alive, stoned. They had every opportunity to recant. Every chance to save themselves by admitting the resurrection was a fabrication. These were not men dying for an abstract belief passed down through generations. These were eyewitnesses. They were either telling the truth about what they saw, or they were dying to protect a lie they personally invented. Not one of them broke. Gibson leaned forward and asked Rogan directly, "Who dies for something they know is a lie?" People die for beliefs all the time, but nobody willingly submits to torture and execution to protect a hoax they personally invented. Not under Roman interrogation, not under the threat of crucifixion, not when their families were at risk. Rogan did not have an answer, and the silence in that room said more than any rebuttal ever could. The truth that will not stay buried. This is not a story about a movie. This is a story about what happens when one man risks everything to tell something that powerful forces wanted buried. Gibson bet his career, his reputation, and $30 million on a vision the entire system said would fail. Lightning struck people on his set 3 times. An atheist found faith. A girl stopped seizing. $700 million in tickets sold to a film in dead languages that Hollywood refused to make. The industry still has not recovered from being that wrong. And now Gibson is building something bigger, something they do not want made. So here is the question that should stay with you long after this video ends. If the supernatural events on that set were just coincidence, why do the people who witnessed them still refuse to call them that? Why has not one of them, in over 20 years, walked back their account? And if they were not coincidences, what exactly was watching what Mel Gibson was creating? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this changed how you see this film, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because when Gibson's Resurrection Project finally surfaces, you are going to want to be here for that conversation.